everybody, today we're talking about the Lamy 2000 Stainless Steel Edition. So the Lamy 2000 was a very famous pen, critically acclaimed on many accounts, present in the MoMA, and, obviously that stuff's kind of a little bit silly, but, I'm sure Gerd Mueller is quite happy with his accomplishments. In terms of design, he's very famous for his pen, his shaver, and I believe that one really weird chair was him as well. But today we're talking about the pen. So the Lamy 2000 Stainless Steel Edition is obviously predominantly stainless steel. That's kind of the big selling point of it. And its brother or cousin or sibling, however you want to call it, the regular Lamy 2000 is quite similar in many regards, predominantly appearance, and the nib's pretty similar, but everything else is quite different, and when everything else is different, then that changes the whole writing experience of everything. So with this pen, interestingly enough, when I got it, I was just like, oh wow, this is like really cool, and I think when I was going to purchase it, one of the cool things that I, told my family and friends about, I was just like, oh wow, the clip here, it's coated in platinum. And the funny thing is I could find no evidence of that online as I was like looking more into it about this pen, and the only the only place that's ever been mentioned is on the Goulet Pen's overview of this pen in particular, and I'm just like, oh, that's where I got that idea from. But other than that, there's no evidence or proof other than that. From top to bottom, it's a matte finish stainless steel, and, well, it's a matte brushed finish, which is kind of an interesting descriptor for a pen, but, I can sort of understand what they're going for with the description of that. And I believe everything else is just predominantly stainless steel, though I think on the inside, the gripper cap, so this is a snap cap, the gripper cap is made out of what I think might be brass, which, I suppose, no one knows how well a lot of these things are going to hold up in the very long term, though, many of these pens have survived since 1966 when they were first conceived, so there's something to be said for that. The nib is a 14 karat platinum coated nib, and the other fun thing about that is, with Goulet, they're like, oh, it's a rhodium-plated nib. And I'm like, is that really true? And, you go to the Lamy website, go to other pen dealers, and they all specifically mention that it's a platinum-coated nib, which is kind of an odd thing for a pen. Rhodium is the most common form of a silvery-looking material for plating of nibs. So it's kind of interesting that Lamy went ahead and did a platinum coating for this. And similarly, for the regular model, the black one that's made out of Macrolon, that one's also a platinum-coated 14-karat nib. So, identical nib in both of them. This is a piston-filled pen, meaning that you adjust the back piston that's here on the back, which will engage a little, I imagine it's a plastic bit on the inside. Obviously, I haven't taken one of these fully apart. And I know that there's plenty of videos where people completely take them apart to clean them and service them and all that. So if you're very curious about that, I suggest looking at one of those. But in general, you're not supposed to take these apart at all. The piston mechanism engages as you turn the back and moves the plunger up and down, kind of similar to most other plungers involved with the piston mechanism. It holds a decent amount of ink. I wouldn't call it a crazy amount. Mostly because I think there's the issue of there's a large space involved in there, but when you're just doing a single pass-through of filling up the ink, you're only filling up half of it, and then you have to expel the ink and refill it again, and a lot of times that's too much effort, and I kind of want to go through multiple inks, and so I'm not really worried about that. In terms of ink capacity, it's not something I'm usually generally concerned about, but this one lasts for quite a long time, and the only problem with this one is You don't know that you're out of ink until you are out of ink, essentially. Well, there's that awkward moment where, like, it's slightly dribbling and, slightly writing, and you're like, oh, why is my pen not working? And then you realize that your pen's out of ink. But compared to the other version of this that has the ink window, this does not, which it kind of adds to the excitement and mystery of things, doesn't it? Build quality of this thing is quite immaculate, and obviously you can find flaws in every single form of manufacturing processes, but overall it's very hard to be unhappy with this, especially for the price. This pen feels very nice in the hand, but it might not be to some people's liking because of the weight. So the pen body is 34 grams, and the cap is 20 grams. So overall it's 54, and personally, I never post any sort of pen, so the cap weight is completely pointless to me. And the body, it feels very substantial in the hand, which is something that I kind of missed out on the regular version of the Lamy 2000. But the problem for some people might be the weight distribution. The center of gravity for this pen is like very slightly above the middle point, and one would think like, oh, the balance point's in the middle, like that's perfectly weighted pen. But the problem is when you're holding it, you're not holding it in the middle, you're holding it near the top. So while the gravity is kind of pushing down while you're holding it, it feels kind of odd. It's better than having it back weighted, because that's the main reason I don't post pens, is from back weighting. But overall, I think it's quite fun to use because of the weight. It's kind of a different experience compared to a lot of pens. So what would you use this pen for? This could easily be a daily use pen. This could be something you carry to work. This is something you just use at your desk for journaling. It's kind of an overall all-rounder pen that it's fun to use, it's practical, it's, I would say, convenient for the most part. Snap caps are easily my favorite type of capping mechanism compared to screw caps. Screw caps can be fun, but the snap cap is certainly a lot more convenient, easier to use, and a lot less of a fuss. The smoothness on this pen is something that's kind of interesting, and it's something you'll read about or hear people talk about, and you might wonder, you're like, oh, how much are people exaggerating this? But it's kind of true where people talk about the sweet spot involved with the Lamy 2000. I have two pens, which isn't the greatest sampling size for things, but both of them have a very similar experience in terms of the sweet spot for them. They are very nice to write, very smooth, and mine are quite wet, which I think is pretty typical of a lot of Lamy pens that I have. I have quite a few Lamy pens, and they all write quite wet compared to what their size would indicate. In terms of consistency, in regards to writing for a long period of time, sometimes it has trouble getting started, this one in particular. Obviously, those kinds of things can be adjusted, but only to some degree, because when you open it up, make it more wet so that it writes easier and starts easier, no hard stops, then you're affecting other issues. One issue that I had with a different pen is that it started dripping ink everywhere, and so you had to kind of bring it back to where it was before, and there's a sweet spot for both writing and for the consistency of pens. The saturation on this pen, as I said, it's quite wet, and I think that's kind of a good thing. It's something that I enjoy a lot, where you use an ink and you get a different color than you're used to. If I'm using a purple ink, it might be kind of a bright lilac in some situations, or it might be a completely dark purple, almost black in other situations, and I think that's kind of fun. So this one's kind of more closer to that more saturated aspect in terms of how this one in particular writes. I get a lot of enjoyment out of this pen, both aesthetically, writing, and kind of showing it off to people. There's a lot of people that I'm friends with who they're very new to the pen realm, and a lot of people who start off early in the pen world will have a Metropolitan, or they'll have a Lamy Safari. Those are kind of the two main big ones that a lot of people start out with in terms of fountain pens, and to show them something that's kind of the bigger and better version of a Safari. I'm not sure if I'd go that far. They're quite different things, but they're the same manufacturer, so it's something that they're familiar with compared to showing them something like a Leonardo. They might be confused or not have heard of that brand or unfamiliar with just pens in general, so it's kind of fun to show them something that they might be familiar with and kind of cross that bridge a bit more. Along those lines, you show them something like this and you're like, oh yeah, this thing, it's like $200, and they're like, oh my gosh, they get taken aback by how much money that is compared to like how much theirs was, their $20 or $30 Lamy Safari, and then they get, it might be too much of a jump for them, for some people, to go into that kind of price range. You kind of have to slowly go up for them. So some comparisons with this pen. A nice comparison is obviously the other partner of the Lamy 2000 series, the most popular version, the Macallan one. As I said before, they're quite different pens, but it's interesting to experience the comparison between the two. I might do a video on a later date comparing them more in depth. Compared to the Lamy Safari, obviously it's a completely different experience in terms of weight, nib, smoothness, weirdness of the sweet spot. It's kind of interesting to kind of go back and forth between the two. So some recommendations in regards to this pen. I would recommend anyone who's kind of interested in the Lamy series, that kind of is like looking to upgrade. They don't want to go too crazy out there, but they're looking for a nice gold nib, and they're looking for something that's kind of a different writing experience than what they're used to. I think for the price, it's kind of a unique experience that you can't get anywhere else. If you were to get the Lamy 2000, the regular version, I'd say that's kind of a vaguely similar experience to other entry-level gold nibs because of just the weight, and the shape is kind of different, but in terms of coolness factor, I think this is a very cool pen because not only do you get a gold nib for something that's under $500, but you also get a lot of interesting fine details of craftsmanship involved with this, in terms of the way that the clip is polished, the way that there's brushing on the finials, and in terms of how finely the tolerances are for the mechanism. Overall, I hope you liked my overview of the Lamy 2000 Stainless Steel Edition. I hope to see you guys again next time.